My name's Catherine Dines. It's a relatively new name for me. I've been attending the place since the fall of 2022, kind of sporadically because life is crazy. And it's a really great privilege to be able to share my story or some version of my story with all of you. Actually, there's a quote I really love by Maya Angelou that there's no greater agony than bearing the untold story inside of you. So it's actually, I think, a really big privilege, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to try to stumble through some version of my story in a succinct way. And as far as I see it, there are kind of two main tasks associated with sharing my life so far. The one is to kind of report life events to you, even at only 31 years old, so young, so fresh. There are a lot of life events, so it's a bit of a challenge to weed out which ones are important and what things should be shared. And that kind of leads to the second task, as far as I see it, is to kind of infer some meaning, identify themes and patterns, and set out these events in a way that makes sense as a story. And this part's a really big challenge. I am a person who loves stories. As you can see, I have a background in storytelling, and I always kind of seen my life as being part of a story that was heading in a general direction, but I kind of lost the plot a few years ago. So this is a funny time to be asked to do this. If you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I feel like I would have had a really great story. And now I'm not so sure. So what I thought I'd do, it's not exactly that it took an unexpected turn either, because that's great for storytelling. It's more just like new events happened that changed the meanings of the old ones. So I thought today I'd kind of share the story as I saw it unfolding, and then share how the last 3 or 4 years have gone, and kind of just stick to the plot points a bit, because I'm not sure what to say about what they all mean. And I'll leave with some questions that have arisen from those life events, because that's really where I'm at, is the question stage. I should mention that I will talk a little bit about death, and I just thought it was important to mention that that's going to come up, because I don't want to give anybody a jump scare. Yeah. So, okay, I was born in Fort St. John, which is just about an hour outside of the community where my family was living, which is called Hudson's Hope. Very tiny little community. My dad's an electrical engineer, and he was managing the now somewhat infamous Peace River Dam. And my mom is a registered nurse, or they're both kind of semi-retired now. I'm the youngest of 5 children, and I was an unanticipated extra delight. My parents raised me with strong values of modesty, hard work, integrity, humble ambition, and if you can't tell from that list, I come from a Dutch Christian Reformed background. On both sides, it's a whole thing. My parents' faith is very strong, still is, and has guided their lives and the raising of all of us children through every step of the way. Being born as a youngest child in a big family, I was born in day one to being surrounded by love and lots of companionship. There were always people coming in and out of our house, not just our family members, but lots of other people. And our home was a really full, loving, and really safe place. I loved being around other people, always. We all had our own bedrooms growing up, and I hated it. I would always be begging my siblings to have sleepovers, especially the 4th of the 5 children, my sister Lisa. I'd always be saying, let's go sleep in the guest bed tonight, and ask my mom, and she reluctantly agreed sometimes. In the summers, as a family, we'd often camp or go on really long road trips, and we got really close that way. We did lots of long adventures, including one 7-week road trip all the way kind of perimeter of the continent, pretty much. When not adventuring, my parents would have the tent trailer that we traveled with in the backyard, and I'd use all my powers of persuasion, which I have to say got pretty strong at pretty young age, to convince my sisters and brothers to sleep in the tent trailer in the summer with me, and they did very frequently, and those are some of my favorite childhood memories. One of the virtues of being the youngest child was that I was very early on a quest to distinguish myself from my siblings, and that's probably more of a big family thing than a specifically youngest child thing, but from the first day I was born, I was never anybody's only daughter. I was never anybody's only sister. And I was really close in age to my sister Lisa, unanticipated part. So my experience was not really as the babied, precious, little youngest child that everyone is like, oh, you're my last one, you know? And I think maybe I craved a little bit of that, specialness. So from a very young age, I was always trying to find a way to be special to people. And that kind of came out in two ways. One was this desire to be in intimate relationships. So I was always looking as a little kid for like my best friend. I read a lot of Anne of Green Gables, and I was looking for my kindred spirit all the time. Somebody who would soothe this loneliness that I perceived as not being really ever special. I even invented an imaginary best friend who I named Karen. It had no pejorative meanings at the time, and if there's a Karen here, I'm sorry that ever occurred, because I loved my best friend Karen when I was a kid, my imaginary best friend, and I would pray often that God would bring me my Karen. And actually, I was looking through my old diaries when and I often write about, oh, there's a new kid coming to class, maybe she's my Karen, you know? I never really found that connection. The other way I quickly learned that I wanted to try to be special was through achievements. And as a little kid, my siblings, my mom and dad were really committed to us learning music. And so all my older siblings were taking music lessons, most of them taking piano, and I didn't want to do just what they did, so I asked to play violin. And it soon became clear to me that through a combination of extra interest and hard work, I might be able to surpass my siblings. So I even started to get a little bit of feedback from teachers that I could be special musically. And as the years went on, I started to take that feedback and work harder and add more. And I went from taking violin to violin and piano and voice and music theory, and eventually adding a cappella choir, community chamber orchestra. And at every juncture, when I got positive feedback, my little internal special monster would just eat it up and beg for more. This created a bit of a positive feedback loop, because I would work harder and get more feedback, and work even harder and get more feedback. In high school, I was introduced to musical theater, and that was a whole new level of interest. On stage, I loved being able to use just one little wink or a subtle movement and have the audience laughing or crying with me, and I craved that impact and the ensuing praise, and I sought it out as much as I could. As I entered adolescence, I became aware of a kind of a persistent sense of melancholy and ill ease. And I wasn't self-aware enough to know where that was coming from, so I kind of just, I think a lot of kids do this, I don't know, picked arbitrary reasons for it. The low-hanging fruit was those achievements. It was never enough. I never felt I was reaching the potential my teachers saw in me. And I started to develop some pretty crippling stage fright regarding my violin performance. Not so much with the acting, because I wasn't myself on stage, so that helped. I performed very poorly on a grade 8 violin exam, and I was really shattered by it. I believed I'd hit the ceiling of my classical music ambitions, which is sad, because as an adult now, I'm not sure that's true. But it took me years to get over that disappointment, and in the meantime, I abandoned classical music and pursued theater. I decided I was more of an actor than a violinist anyway. The other way I tried to make sense of those negative feelings was through controlling my body, and I'm not going to get too much into that story because I don't think it really would serve me or you to tell it. It sent me on a very painful and very tumultuous 10-year journey of having a really difficult and disordered relationship with food, and I'm just mentioning it briefly because it was a very big part of my life for a long time, but I'm not going to delve too much into that. In the meantime, my faith was growing and changing, and I was learning a lot. My family was really deeply rooted in the church, and I attended a Christian school. And I attacked spiritual disciplines with the same commitment that I had gave a lot of my other achievements. I had tons of questions, and I wrestled with many of them, the role of women in the church, the origin of being, God's intended version of sexuality. My parents had encouraged all 5 of us to be really curious and critical thinkers, and we became quite strong debaters because of that. We famously had a dictionary next to our dinner table growing up because we had so many fights about the specific meanings of particular words, so it was just quicker to have the dictionary by the table. I wasn't afraid to ask hard questions at that point. As high school wrapped up, I headed into my first year at Vancouver Island University. I just wanted to take some courses while I figured out what I wanted to do. And my sister, Lisa, so she's the 4th of the 5, she and I started to delve into these questions even deeper. I was taking anthropology and sociology and philosophy, and my questions got less specific and more general. I started to ask about the nature of existence generally, the source of human knowledge, about cosmic justice. How could God's redemption plans be fair if faith was largely geographical? That one really stumped me. I did my testimony of faith, though, in that time, resting not on the answers to those questions, but on my belief, ultimately, in a benevolent and powerful God of love. I also decided at this time that I wanted to take my love of theater further, so I auditioned for and got into the Canadian College of Performing Arts, which is here in Victoria, Oak Bay, really, and I headed there at 18 years old. The theater program was intense, and I was working really hard, which I was really familiar with by this time. I had always worked really hard. And my sister came to me one day in the fall while I was there and told me that she had wrestled with these questions and she didn't believe in God anymore, and couldn't help but think that was only a matter of time until I felt the same way. Existential crisis seems like too light a term to describe it. What I felt at that time, when I heard from my sister that she didn't believe in God, I had to confront for the first time in my life the concept of hell. Not intellectually, but like viscerally, really sit with it. And I was sick for weeks. I actually experienced some dissociative episodes, and not the gentle sort of passive, I'm not really here type, but terrifying loss of reality type. And I couldn't compute that my God of love would send someone like my sister, who had sincerely and in good faith, I'd wrestled with her, tried to seek him to hell. And if he would, I couldn't worship him. It was plain as day to me. My parents and mentors told me that life was long, and my sister could have a change of heart, and that only God could judge anyway. But those answers didn't really sit right with me either, because what about every other person who'd sought out truth and arrived at a different conclusion than us? Many of them were already dead. What of them? So I'm not suggesting this is good theology, but at the time I had to choose to walk away from large portions of what I'd believed. I basically said I wasn't ready to let go of God, but I couldn't believe any of that. So for many years after that, I was too scared to ask any more faith-based questions. I just clung to the idea that there is a God. I believe he is. I'm going to stick with this whole Christianity thing, but I'm not going to delve into it any further because it's terrifying. So I threw myself into hard work, which was always my safe space, and chose to cling to the parts I could believe in. I did well at theater school. My inner special monster was well fed, but always looking for more. And I think I got a little too much good feedback, because I got so much that the only reason I could find for not being an instant success after theater school was, again, my uncontrollable body. That said, I loved the stage, and for 6 years after leaving theater school, I lived out of a suitcase and moved where the work was, a compliant slave at the feet of the ephemeral joy of that perfect moment on stage. I worked all over, Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, Courtenay, Chemainus, Rossland, Barkerville, Fort McMurray, weirdly. I made 36 moves in 5 years. There was and is nothing like the in-the-moment experience of co-creating a story with your castmates that can never be told the exact same way again. I loved it. But I struggled. I was lonely. The achievements weren't enough, and many people actually weren't that particularly impressed by my brand of achievements. They liked that kind, the movie kind, but the other kind was a little bit less impressive. I was poor and chaotic and self-centered, constantly seeking validation in the face of rejection. I was obsessed with my image. I was sad a lot of the time. I dated voraciously with no success. I was still trying to find that intimate relationship that would soothe the specialness. And my mental health, which had been poor since adolescence, really went downhill at that time, and I started to finally seek some help. After a really significant mental health crisis in 2014, I decided to complete an undergraduate degree, just so I could feel like I was still accomplishing something in the moments when my acting career wasn't soothing that itch. And I decided to do social work because I thought it was a good employable, finish your degree, right away have a job type of thing. I also decided to do it online so that I could keep working in theater at the same time. So I could be found over the next few years writing term papers backstage, doing readings during breaks and rehearsals. And if you haven't noticed by now, I really always felt that a problem isn't a problem if it can be solved by hard work. So really love to just keep working. Around 2016, I started to brave the wilds of my unexplored faith again. I'd never stopped attending church or professing faith in this whole time. But it was a very shallow version of faith. And around that time, I felt like I could start asking questions again and dipping my toes into this possibility that there were other Christians who kind of felt the same way I did. Excuse me. At this time, I had never heard terms like deconstruction before, and I didn't know actually a lot of other people had gone through similar things as me, and I had just been stumbling blind on my own for no reason. In 2017, I joined a group called Generous Spaces, which no longer exists, I believe, but which is a safe space for queer Christians and allies of queer Christians. I started going as an ally, but it's a very predictable story. Finally, officially came out as bisexual in 2018. My family was really chill about it, partially because I think they were skeptical I could really ever date girls. And they were mostly right. I only dated a few, and I do fight against imposter syndrome, but I am bisexual, and I had actually known it for a long time since I first questioned God's plan for marriage in high school. I had those early questions because I was aware something was different. So in this time, I started to discover that there were shoots of healthy new life rising from the dead branches of my faith, and it was a huge joy and a relief for me. I joined a new church in Vancouver in 2017, and I met amazing friends there. And in 2018, I finished my social work degree, and I was really proud of that. I was 25 years old. I'd started to get the better of that nasty eating disorder I had shared about briefly, and no doubt because of that self-acceptance, I was getting some better and better contracts as an actor. I became a vegan, which is a huge source of joy for me, and I even ran my first marathon. I adopted a cat who turned out to actually be a true kindred spirit and who I loved like he was family, and life was better. And I started to be able to focus outward instead of constantly focusing inward, which is an exhausting part of being depressed. It was a bit of a honeymoon period, though. Truthfully, my acting career, this is an Amy Poehler analogy that I thought just hit the nail right on the head. My acting career was a bad boyfriend that I couldn't seem to leave. Even in the honeymoon phases, I knew I couldn't go on living out of a suitcase forever. My heart was battered and bruised from a lot of rejection because I did work, but there was a lot of no's. And I had to move on, just even for a little while, to give myself a little break. I made that decision, and it took 2 full further years to get the courage to do it. And those 2 years were slow and painful heartbreak. And as it usually goes, I also started to get offered really good jobs, so I couldn't leave. I was like, well, I got to take that one. As 2019 waned, I drew a line in the sand and said, okay, I'm going to do one more contract. I was at Chemainus Theatre. I loved working there. And I bargained with myself I'd try a regular social work job for 2 years. That was 4.5 years ago. And now I'm in law school. So how did that happen? Okay, so I signed a contract to begin a child protection job in Gibson's, because I didn't just go for any social work job. I decided child protection was a good way to cure my depression. My cat Gilbert and I, we moved to Gibson's. And again, I was offered a job in Vancouver where I was living, but no, that would have been too easy, too close to family, or to my community and to my church and everything. I had to move to Gibson's because adventure awaited. When I moved, the loneliness and the disappointment over what I'd thought my life would be came to roost in a big way. The longing to be special had never gone away, and now it had no achievement-based outlet. For the first time in my life, my adult life, I felt no benefit from counseling, which was tough for me because I had relied on that for a really long time. And I struggled to rely on really my biggest fallback, which was hard work. I didn't have an outlet for that, because with a 40-hour work week, you just go home at the end of the day. After years of swimming valiantly against the current of mental illness, I stopped swimming, and I just let the current take me. I became profoundly depressed. I was tired and bored of always being the needy, sad person in my family and friends' lives, so I tried to just become a better listener and not talk about my depression anymore. I leaned heavily on my cat, Gilbert, and I tried not, sort of a dark thought, actually, when you're thinking about this at home, now I'm about to say it out loud, but I tried not to think about how I had to live 60 plus more years, because that was hard thought. Child protection was hard. Sorry, I didn't expect that one to get me. Okay, I don't have time to talk about everything I learned from that job, but it was formative. I did feel like the work hardened me, and it strained my patience and compassion, which had never run short before. I cried constantly with my clients who I loved so much, and I got yelled at so much and so often that I started to forget what normal conflict looks like. And boy, they really will yell at you, and they know every four-letter word, even the 11-year-olds. In February of 2020, Gilbert and I were joined by a roommate named Shenghua, so this is still in Gibson's. Little did I know how important she would be when the whole world shut down a month later, and I rejoiced inwardly because I had left the theater realm just in time. Shenghua became my only human companion. Around this time, I began a new treatment for my depression, and I started to try to slog through daily life with new gentleness and self-acceptance. I was never going to be a supernaturally happy-go-lucky person, but I could put one foot in front of the other, and I started to ask myself whether maybe I'm not the main character all the time. You know, maybe this sadness about my own dreams was blinding me from being able to be the best sister, daughter, friend, and social worker I could be. Now, to me, all of this still fits within the plot. This is where I kind of lose the plot. In August 2020, my roommate Shenghua went to bed with a headache. I texted her at midnight asking if everything was okay, which is a little bit of a strange thing to do. But I had a weird feeling, and the next morning I found her in her bedroom deceased. She was 25 years old, in perfect health. She had a really bright future, but she had an aneurysm. Sorry. It was, just like I said, I didn't want to give you a jump scare, but it was the most profound shock of my life. And I spent the next week reporting every one of her last actions, her last meals, everything to her distraught parents, helping her family pack her belongings, and trying to understand how this could happen. Weirdly, her death made me realize I wasn't ready to die. I had passively been hoping that I wouldn't have to do that 60 plus years, but seeing how easy death could actually come, I realized I had a lot more to do. And I don't want that to sound like it's a silver lining of her death, because that's not how it felt. It's not like that was a gift. It was just something I noticed. Okay, so this, like I said, I lose the plot here. 6 weeks later, in a haze of grief and confusion, I was scrolling through a dating app to pass the time. And let me emphasize, this was an activity I did constantly for years. So there's nothing special about the fact that I was scrolling through a dating app. That night I matched with some guy who liked music and cats and was also from Nanaimo, coincidentally, and I agreed to talk on the phone with him one night. We chatted as I walked along the beach near my house, and I realized, he's actually really nice, and his voice was so melodious, and he had such a beautiful manner of speaking, and I realized, oh man, I can't use this poor man to pass the time. That's rude. So I told him, I'm in no place to date. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to waste your time, but my friend, literally just died a few weeks ago in our house. And he said, well, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Which is not the response I was expecting. We started dating, and the rest is history. Sort of. Actually, wouldn't that be nice? The first year was really, really hard. Dating someone who's not only freshly traumatized by a death, but also clinically depressed, and working in a job that re-traumatizes you every day is no small feat. And I'm shocked that Craig, who's my husband, who's sitting here today, was willing to ride those waves with me. Craig is also, I hope you don't mind me calling you out, Craig, but also an atheist, and I always pictured being with a Christian. And the more we talked, though, and maybe you're more of an agnostic, I don't know. The more we talked, the more I realized our beliefs were actually a lot more similar than all the Christian people who I'd been dating, which is, maybe this is more about me. But I just felt we really were an intellectual match, and I felt my faith could be stronger through refinement in talking to Craig. We moved in together in November 2021, much to the chagrin of my parents. But it's all good, we made it legal later on. There were really, really hard days in the early going, and to be honest, the honeymoon phase never really hit, and I often questioned if that was a sign we weren't meant to be, but something in me knew to stick with it, and I'm glad I did. We moved to Victoria in 2022 so that I could attend law school. And that was never, ever on my radar until the sun was almost setting on my acting career, and my mom suggested that my skills as an actor and a social worker might have some crossover with the law, which is kind of true, actually, in my experience now, having done 2 out of 3 years of law school. Law school is hard, and like I've said, I love hard work, and I've done a lot of hard work in my life, but it is hard. And I have questioned in the past why I had the audacity to choose this path of all the paths available to me. Exam periods have proved really eventful in law school. In my first fall exam period, Craig proposed to me, and we got engaged. In the spring of first year, my cat Gilbert, who I've mentioned a few times, I loved him extremely deeply, and he became suddenly and unexpectedly ill. Craig and I were both trying our best to care for him and soak up the last weeks and days of his life when we learned that my brother Jordan's wife was terminally ill with cancer. 12 hours after we learned of Amy's diagnosis, Gilbert died. 24 hours after that, I wrote my torts exam. Last summer was spent traveling back and forth from Vernon, where my brother Jordan and his wife Amy lived. My family tried to be there for Jordan and Amy, but we stumbled many, many times. I'd always thought tragedy would bring us closer together and would bring the best out of us. Such a naive belief, based no doubt on tragic novels and movies I'd seen. And it really didn't. To me, it felt like grief capitalized on our disagreements, feasted on our insecurities, and drew out our weaknesses, really. I stumbled many times, and I still am. In the last week of Amy's life, I had the privilege of being with her. Spent a lot of time sitting in the hospital lobby with her mom. We had kind of been spelling off as a family, and it just happened to be that I was there as she was leaving the earth, and spent a lot of time just crying with her mom, crying with my brother. The in-between place between life and death isn't beautiful, and we didn't get to have beautiful speeches of goodbyes. There was so much pain, and there was a long period of I'm mindful now that this is recording, because I don't want my brother, I don't know what he would say, but for me it felt like there's some clinging to faith that God would heal Amy. And that, I think, was really meaningful for her, but for me, it meant I never really got to say goodbye, because she wasn't ever ready to accept that she was dying. She died on August 27th, 4.5 months after she was given a year to live. It wasn't right and it wasn't fair, and I don't personally believe that it was God's will. Craig and I got married 4 months later. I don't know. He had held me through my grief for Shengwa, and he'd cared for my cat with so much tenderness, and carried me inch by inch through that summer with Amy. And then in the fall, as I raged through the hardest semester of my life, because for some reason, again, it felt like hard work would help, but it didn't. It was the hardest I've ever worked. Craig approached me with grace and tenderness that I could never have expected. So what does it all mean? Where is my faith now? I don't know. I think in my depression, in Gibson's, I kind of learned to hold my questions and my beliefs really, really gently. And I think a lot of things slipped out of my hands, to be honest. I hope they're still on the floor where I dropped them to still be picked up. The love story that I'd longed for forever. Some people have said I met Craig when I was least expecting it and the moment I needed him most. I don't think that feels right to me. I was on a dating app. I was expecting it. I had been on them for years. I think Craig came late. Sorry, honey, but it would have been really great if you came earlier. And really, honestly, what a terrible, horrible time to meet the love of your life. The worst possible time. It wasn't a fun way to start. But despite everything, our love, it is magical. I do have to say that. Craig and I have built our love on really solid rock, and I didn't walk into marriage on faith, really. I mean, there is still faith there, but I'd seen our love tested quite a lot. And my family, we may not be closer than ever. There are some wounds, I think, that got exposed in this recent season, but honestly, I have a beautiful, wonderful family. So it's not quite so easy to say, as this last few years have been tragedy unadulterated. Like, really, there's a lot going on. So, does being special still matter to me? Or did Craig heal that wound forever? I don't think so. Sorry, honey. I went to law school to be a litigator. People don't go to law school with nothing to prove, in my experience. So my best guess is that I'm in the middle of the story and not the end. And that the story I thought I was telling before of, finding intimate love and being special might be over. Probably never was the story. Anyway, this is life. It doesn't really follow neat patterns or go where we expect. Amy's story wasn't over when it ended. And neither was my roommate Xinghua's, but not at all. The platitudes we all hear are as empty as they sound and as they feel to say, and I know because I've said them a lot recently to my brother. I try really hard not to, though. So I'm glad the title of this talk is My Life So Far and not My Life Story, because if I can say nothing else, I really want to see the next chapter. And I don't take that for granted. I don't take a lot for granted right now. And that gratitude doesn't always bring me joy. I think one thing I really thought about in preparing for this is, sadness and I are pretty natural companions. Joy takes a little more work. But gratitude brings me hope. And sadness and hope can coexist. And they're very wanted and peaceful companions. So sorry to leave you on sort of an empty note there, but that's where I'm at. I'm excited to see the next chapter, and that means a lot to me. Yeah. Thank you.